son, where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
All right, welcome back, folks. It is the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. We're back again. And today we are joined by a titan in the field of research about JFK and other political assassinations of the 60s. He's the founder of kennedysandking.com. He's written or co-authored 4 books on the subject. He wrote the screenplay for Oliver Stone's JFK Revisited Through the Looking Glass and JFK Destiny Betrayed. And his latest book is Chokeholds That Inescapably Prove There Was a Conspiracy. And it should serve as a great companion to the coming declassification of the remaining files. Mr. James DiEugenio, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, I guess let's just jump right into it. How excited were you when you saw that executive order come through and there finally being like a real serious push to get this last batch out?
Well, that was, I kind of predicted that Trump would almost have to do that because there had been a lot of pressure on him by people like Andrew Napolitano and Joe Rogan and Robert Kennedy Jr. All right. And he had promised to do this back in 2017, but he had backed out at the last moment. In fact, on the day he was supposed to do it, he backed out of it. All right. And Andrew Napolitano brought this up in a conversation with Trump. And he said words to the effect, you broke your word to the American people. And Trump said, about what? And he said, you said that you were going to declassify the last of the secret JFK documents, but you didn't. And he said words to the effect, Andrew, if they would have shown you what they showed me, you wouldn't have done it either.
Right.
And Andrew says, who is they and what did they show you? Okay, and he said, and Trump said, when there's not 15 people listening in on the conversation, I'll tell you. All right. So then he went on Joe Rogan during the most recent presidential campaign.
Right.
And Joe Rogan brought it up again. And he said, more or less, that he felt he had made a mistake the first time around, which he would counteract this time. And then once he chose Robert Kennedy to be part of his cabinet, Robert Kennedy Jr., okay, because, of course, Robert Kennedy's uncle and father were both assassinated in the 1960s within 5 years of each other, with some very serious questions about both those cases.
Right.
All right. And Trump more or less had to do what he did. Now, I give him a lot of credit for doing it. But, as they say, the devil is in the details, and we'll see how this progresses. There's 2 or 3 congressmen who are very keen on this. One of them is named Burchett. One of them is named Cohen. All right. And I think they should be brought into the process to make sure that it proceeds in both a timely and an honest way. There's about 36 or 3,700 documents, and that's just a number of documents. There's many more pages than that, okay? The question, of course, is, why is it 61 years later and we still don't know what they're hiding?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Finer details.
Right. What are they hiding and why? And it strikes. It's a bigger issue than just the John Kennedy assassination. It strikes at the very heart of who's running the government. If we believe in a democracy, then the public should know, all right, the deepest, darkest secrets about one of the ugliest days in contemporary history. Actually 3 days, if you pile in both the Martin Luther King case and the Robert Kennedy Jr. case.
Sure.
The Robert Kennedy case. All right. So if people don't know what really happened. How can a democracy survive? And there's a lot of people, including myself, who believe that this has been one of the most pernicious aspects of eroding people's confidence in America. All right? And by the way, it's just not me that feels that way. In Larry Sapato's book, The Kennedy Half Century, he did focus groups on this subject. And they said that after Kennedy's assassination, a period of skepticism and depression came in, countervailing against the optimism, and unity of the post-war United States. Now, do you know how many people said that? 91% of the people who were interviewed said that was the case.
Jeez.
All right. And it was very high among people who actually lived at the time. All right. Which, I'm one of them. All right. And so that's sort of the way I feel also. So this is why I believe it's important, to see those documents declassified in toto.
Yeah, I completely agree with all that. I think it's of vital importance that we get some clarity there, because that's the thing that always kind of blew my mind. Even as a kid, my dad is not a person who generally entertains conspiracy theories. He's very straight-laced in that respect. But he was always open to the idea that there was some nonsense that occurred with JFK's death. There was something else going on there. So as a kid, I was familiar with the story, and they would break it down in a simple way that I could understand. But one of the things I could never really reconcile in my mind is how, even though it was the hippie era, things were a little bit more progressive, by and large, America was still pretty straight-laced, Republican, like the average suit-wearing individual. To think that at that time, even conservative folks were like, there's something weird here. That to me is a huge indicator that there wasn't a single point where they were getting one over on anyone. Most people could clearly see that there was some nonsense going on there. Greater coordination. And even with this is just like a funny aside, but even the term conspiracy theory, there's this whole conspiracy that using the term in a derogative way as a conspiracy theorist, that itself is a psyop to quell people who were dissenting against the Warren Commission.
That's true. And there's a writer who's passed on who proved this, that the term conspiracy theory was not really commonly used until 1967, when all this controversy about the Kennedy assassination was hitting the fans. Okay, it was very, very seldom used prior to that. Okay, but after 1967, when the CIA issued a report called Countering the Critics, all right, it was at that time that the usage of that term literally zoomed up.
Yeah.
Okay, the charts, and became the common mantra to smear and discredit critics of the Warren Report.
Yeah, it's just wild. Even as a kid, I was cognizant of the fact that nobody was buying it then, so it's not that hard to not buy it now. I guess the other question with the declassification of the documents is what do you hope? What to you is something that would be thank you. This finally, now we can end this, at least this portion of the debate.
Some of the people I know who have been to the National Archives say that a lot of these classified documents deal with Oswald in Mexico City, which is a very interesting, to say the least, is a very interesting episode in Oswald's life. because there's a sizable amount of people who have read the literature on this, and they think that there's some serious doubts about Oswald being in Mexico City at that time. And there's things we already know that make this idea problematic. All right. Now, on the other hand, I don't expect there to be what's called a smoking gun. He did it, kind of document there, because the CIA has had 61 years, to work on these things.
Right.
Okay, and they're not stupid, and they didn't want to be a part of this process from the beginning. Right. All right. Neither did the FBI. Right?
Well, and there's a practice.
The FBI, for example, well, before I tell this story, I should preface it with this statement. The reason that we have this declassification question before us is because in 1991, Oliver Stone released his film, JFK. At the end of the movie, in a crawler at the end of the film, he alerted the public to the fact that the files of the last investigation, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, that their documents, literature, reports, etc., have been stashed away to 2029. All right. Most people didn't know that. And this created a firestorm in Washington. Faxes, telegrams, letters, phone calls, etc. And so Congress was forced to create something called the Assassination Records Review Board. They were in operation from 94 to 98. And they declassified about 2 million pages. And unfortunately, they couldn't finish the job due to time restrictions and also money. All right, and so this is why we have this problem that's left over. In the final report of the review board, they wrote that by October of 2017, everything should be declassified. And that's when Trump said that he was going to do this back then. Then Mike Pompeo came into his office and read him the Riot Act, which this is a common thing that the CIA does. They say, look, if you declassify this, you're going to expose this agent we have in Northern Africa, okay? And even though he's 80 years old, all right, his name's going to be on this document, and if any harm comes to him, we're going to blame you, okay? And this is what they do all the time.
Yeah, they were doing it all during 9/11 too, and the war on terror.
So this is why Trump backed out. All right. Now, he did release some documents, but he put a 6-month hold on it. Then, at the end of the 6 months, he put a 3-year hold on it, and that went over into the Biden administration.
Right.
And as bad as Trump was on this, Biden was worse. See, the strength of the review board was this. They reversed the burden of proof. In a regular Freedom of Information Act hearing, the plaintiff goes in, let's say it's me, and I say I want to see the rest of this document. But I haven't been able to look at it. All right? And so the CIA or the FBI comes in, and they say what I just said. This will be a danger to national security. Okay, lives will be in jeopardy, etc. And more often than not, the plaintiff would lose. All right, after spending a lot of money. Now, what the review board did was different. They had the document in their hands. They would put it on screen. They would call in the FBI. And they would say, what could you possibly object to in 1994 with declassifying this document? All right. And then I know this for a fact is what happened. The FBI guy had his lawyer next to him, and he says to the lawyer, can they really do that? And the lawyer says, yes, they can. See, this was the originality and power of the review board, because it reversed the burden of proof.
Right.
You had to prove why it should not be declassified.
Right.
When in fact, we're looking right at it. All right? And so this is why, in the matter of months, the CIA and the FBI kind of yielded, okay, because they saw the handwriting on the wall, all right, and there would be literally bunches of declassifications. Like 1 month there would be 30,000, and the next month there would be 40,000, etc. All right? But there were still things that they considered off limits. Now, let me give your audience an education on just how bad this is. And it's pretty bad. There's an attorney up in Canada named Andrew Eiler who was just at the National Archives a few months ago. In the memo the Justice Department sent to Trump in October of 2017, it's called the Gannon Memo. The lawyer said that there were no final determinations made in the documents that are being withheld. Now, what does that mean? A final determination means that the agency has said such and such a document should be declassified by, say, 2006 or 2007. Well, guess what? There were final determinations made, and Andrew discovered them down at the National Archives. So, in other words, this guy either didn't know what he was talking about, or he was deceiving Trump.
Yeah.
All right? Now, what makes this all the worse, and this gets pretty bad, in the JFK Record Collections Act, it said that there should be periodic reviews of the outstanding documents to see if they're ready to declassify. Now, you know how many periodic reviews there were?
I'm going to guess not many.
So, in other words, the National Archives completely failed, in its vigilance on the act. The only thing that they did is in, I believe it was July of 2017, since they knew October 2017 was the termination date, they announced that they were going to declassify the rest of this stuff. And if there were going to be any objections, you better make it now.
Get it
so
in
this
now.
is sort of like, telegraphing a punch. Okay, hey, I'm going to hit you right below the mouth with my right hand.
Get ready.
All right? But this is what they did.
Yeah.
All right? And so this is why the FBI and the CIA went into the Oval Office, and this is why Trump buckled. Okay? All right, see, this is how bad this situation has become. All right? And this is why I think it's justified, that there's a lot of cynicism and there's a lot of skepticism about, the way the government functions.
Sure.
Why is this so secret? 61 years after Kennedy was killed. Why?
Well, I mean, there are many thoughts on that. I've also thought in the utopian scenario, we get everything. We get some like true clarity as to what's going on there. The realization by most people that, I mean, even okay, again, why would he get assassinated? Like the practical person even asking themselves, why is there a conspiracy? Who would want to kill Kennedy? And when you really start zooming out, there's plenty in America alone, but you start zooming out to the greater part of the world and major players are involved and literally people who are in charge of assassination operations all over the world. Do they have the means? Do they have the ability? Of course they do. And did he piss them off in some way, or were they at each other's throats for some reason? Yes, they were. But I don't know. Like, I really feel people might be more receptive to it now than ever. But I agree with you that this distrust from this one event and then the subsequent assassinations of this era created a new wave of skepticism on behalf of the American public to the government. And is it getting better? I don't know. We just had QAnon and any other type of conspiracy that you see how people react to it.
QAnon is a distraction.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
And like, I'm absolutely 100% willing to accept that most of, PSYOP, that's a real thing. That's a real military technique. We've been using that for a long time. It predates America, but America has kind of refined it to this very special kind of thing. And even the idea of not trusting your government, that's specially baked into the American experience in a different way than anywhere else in the world. The story of how America becomes a country, it literally says in our founding documents, we have to protect against a tyrannical government. So I think it's like part of the American experience to be a little bit skeptical of your government. But this event and then another 60 years of a lot of really shady business dealings puts us in a very strange place. I'm also suspect, like, yeah, they might declassify the documents, but what are they going to redact? Like, what are they?
That's the whole point of this. There's supposed to be no redactions in these documents. Now, prior to October 2017, the redactions were copious. There were documents we were getting that were
totally
half blacked out.
Yeah.
All right. And it's really shocking to see that. All right. But now what Trump's order is going to say is that everything should be out in the open. All right. Okay. There isn't any reason in 2025 for there to be any redactions. All right. And that's a very important point. And I believe that with Robert Kennedy Jr. there, all right, that this very likely will happen. Now, Bobby Kennedy Jr. wanted his daughter-in-law to be installed as deputy director of the CIA. All right, because he actually wanted her to run the declassification process. And I don't think that happened. It would have been great if he would have gotten that.
Yeah, a Kennedy
all right,
in
but
charge.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. Like I said, the proof will be in the pudding. All right. Now, let me get to another point that's very important. Because Trump was deceived by the Justice Department about there being no final determinations, this is why he had to issue this order, when in fact he didn't. Okay, if the review board had already set a final determination on the documents, and from what I can see, and from what my friend, the lawyer Andrew Eiler up in Canada, has seen, this is what they did. And Andrew talked to a couple of members of the review board, the chairman, John Thunheim, and the chief counsel, Jeremy Gunn. And according to them, they had placed final determinations on every document. All right, that's what they said. That's what they remembered. So therefore, Trump really never had to do this. All he had to do was order the immediate declassification. And that would have been it. And we wouldn't have to wait this 15 days. We wouldn't have to wait for a plan from the Attorney General.
Right.
All right, and the Defense Intelligence National Estimates Chief, etc. We don't have to wait for any of that stuff. We could just have these right now. Now, let me add one last point on this issue before we get to who might have Kennedy and why. There's 2 or 3 congressmen, one of them named Cohen and one of them named Burchett, who have actually been pretty good on this issue. And Oliver Stone mentioned them in his press release on this topic. Their idea, and I agree with it, is that once these are all declassified, and if there's something new in the document that leads to another paper trail, then that trail should be followed and that document should be opened up. Okay? All right, that's really the only way to do this thing.
Yeah.
And so that's another qualification I would put, on this whole process. Now, you asked the question that almost everybody asks. Okay. Who Kennedy and why? All right. And that's a logical question as to why these documents are being withheld. All right. Today, one of the more predominant theories about Kennedy's assassination, and it's one that I subscribe to, is that this was a triangular conspiracy, a triangular plot with the CIA, the Cuban exiles, and later they dragged in the mob in order to get rid of Oswald. All right. Now, if you take a look at Oswald, it's pretty clear that from his days in the Civil Air Patrol, there was a lot of intelligence influence with him. All right. And there was even CIA interest in him before he defected to Russia. I don't know if you know that, but one of the declassified documents that came out was by a woman named Betsy Wolfe. Betsy Wolfe's job at the House Select Committee on Assassinations was to analyze the Oswald file. All right. I didn't see these documents until about 3 years ago. 3 or 4 years ago. They should have been declassified in 2006. She asked for every division charter in the CIA. I think there were 9 of them. Once she got the charters, she went through them all. And from that, she put a chart on the board. This is what Oswald's file should have done. Then she asked for the file. And guess what? It didn't do anything like that. It was supposed to go to something called the SR division. It didn't go there. It went to a place called Office of Security. Now, there also, another point she observed, there should have been what's called a 201 file opened on Oswald. The minute he tried to go to the Russian embassy over there, there should have been what's called a 201 file opened up on him. There wasn't. There was not a 201 file opened up until 13 months later. These two aspects very puzzled her. So she started interviewing people. All right? People retired from the CIA, people in the CIA. And they all agreed with her. They all agreed with her. Yeah, there should have been a 201 file open. Yeah, it should have gone to the SR division.
So it's like the normal channels that would have, how that would have filtered through the CIA. Instead, they were
Right.
special handling. Someone
Now,
cherry picking.
here's the punchline. The last guy she interviewed was a guy named Robert Gambino. Robert Gambino at that time, in 78, late 78, was the chief of the Office of Security. All right? She explained the situation. And he said, look, it doesn't matter how the papers are stamped. It doesn't matter how many papers are coming in. If the client has gone to the first gate, which is the Office of Mail Logistics, those papers will go to where he requested. In other words, somebody was rigging Oswald's file as he went to the Soviet Union. This is one of the most startling things that came out of the ARB. All right? Why would they do something like that? This is so fascinating. And by the way, let me tell you this. Here's the capper. You would think that this is a very important discovery. I mean, I sure would have. It's not in the House Select Committee volumes. Can you believe this? It's not in the House Select Committee volumes. So we had to wait for the review board to declassify these documents for us to see what on earth the CIA was so interested in Oswald as he was going to the Soviet Union, you know, even before he got there. So this is the kind of thing that makes this case so tantalizing, you know, so baffling, you know. I guarantee you we're never going to know the answer to that question.
Oh, almost certainly not. I mean, one of the things you were talking about before as you were kind of just explaining the CIA's process for declassifications, it's still a standard practice to burn documents.
Yes.
Like that's a thing that they do. So there's some stuff that would have been so sensitive, they would have deliberately destroyed any record of it.
Yes.
So we might get a document that refers to that document or a document that mentions something else that occurred and something that was destroyed, but that was absolutely standard practice back then.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, we talked a bit about the idea that he may have been in Mexico, or at least the lie that he was in Mexico. The idea that maybe he has doubles, like actually solidifying the idea that he's not the person who the president. He was the patsy, and he was on behalf of the government for at least some time doing legitimate stuff. He was doing legitimate counterintelligence operations. And what's the question I'm asking here? When do you think, up until the moment that he's in that building or he gets accused of that crime, does he have any inkling this is going on? Is there any proof that he was trying to sniff any of this out, or this was all well above his pay grade?
No, I don't think Oswald had any intimation of what was going to happen that day. All right. I think he was just what he said he was, you know, a patsy. All right. In my opinion, and I'm labeling this as opinion, the plot to Kennedy began to coalesce in the summer of 1963. All right. And this was as a direct result of Kennedy's failure to invade Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when he had the perfect pretext to invade the island. All right. Except he didn't even want to bomb the silos. He didn't even bomb the missile silos. And this is what convinced a lot of the people in the CIA and the Pentagon that Kennedy was some kind of peacenik.
Yeah.
He was some kind of pinko.
In some way. Yeah.
All right. Now, let me add this. It's a good thing Kennedy didn't invade the island, because what I don't think he knew was that the Russians had given the Cubans short-range nuclear warheads, okay, that one set would go 30 miles and the other set would go 85 miles. These were smaller atomic bombs, about the power of what they dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they would have destroyed any kind of invasion flotilla, coming in. And that, of course, would have left Kennedy in a hopeless situation where he would almost have to retaliate.
Yeah.
So it's a really good thing that this did not happen, but that didn't make any difference to these hawks in the CIA and the Pentagon. And I believe that in the summer of '63, they had begun to theorize about a way to get rid of Kennedy. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but before they even tried the Dallas plot, they tried to kill Kennedy in Chicago.
Tampa and Chicago, right.
So you are aware of this.
Yeah. No, yes. But please go on. This is, again, this is the stuff that...
There was a plot to Kennedy, I believe November 2nd or 3rd, in Chicago. And the patsy there was a guy named Arthur Valet, who had a lot of things in common. And in fact, it's almost uncanny,
he fit the type.
How many things he had in common with Oswald. All right, he was a trainer. Okay, I believe in Long Island. All right, he was at a base that harbored the U-2 flights, although it wasn't at Sugi, it was a different base. All right, and he had some mental problems that his sister talked about. So this guy would have been, in some ways, he would have been a better patsy than Oswald.
Yeah.
All right. And this was thwarted when a maid in a hotel room saw what looked like some Cuban guys with 2 rifles, okay, standing up against the wall. And this lead came into the FBI, and the FBI gave it to the Secret Service, and the plot was thwarted. Now, let me also add this. Just like in Dallas, the building where Valet was working in was right off an expressway, and the motorcade would have ridden right in front of the place he was working on, which was the 3rd floor.
Interesting.
Of this warehouse built. Now, come on. How can you get any more evidence that Kennedy was not getting out of 1963 alive?
Yeah.
One way or another, they were going to get rid of him. All right. And if one failed, the other one would not. Now, there's a question about the Chicago plot. Was it really an attempt to Kennedy, or was it a dress rehearsal? Okay. I don't know the answer to that. I kind of think it really was an attempt to Kennedy. But the thing is, you won't read about it in the Warren Commission. You won't read about it there. It was a first-rate journalist named Edwin Black, who has since gone on to make a big name for himself in nonfiction literature, who first wrote about it, I believe, in 1975, and it was in a alternative periodical called the Chicago Independent, which he and his wife ran. All right, and that's when this story came out. It had been submerged for 12 years. I believe it's of the utmost importance. But this is how determined they were, to get rid of Kennedy. If one did not succeed, the other one would. All right. Now, if you take a look at what I believe to be the structure, I believe you have, since Oswald was some kind of lower level intelligence agent, I don't think there's really any argument about that today. All right. And I believe that when he was in New Orleans in the summer of '63, he was part of the CIA and the FBI's attempt to discredit the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. That's the only thing that explains the very strange things that he did while he was there. All right. And then, of course, there's the sights of him inside of Guy Bannister's office. All right. The very right-wing, almost nutty former FBI agent, okay, who was running what was supposed to be a private investigators, and he was really part of both the Bay of Pigs and Mongoose. All right. Well, what would a communist be doing there? Good question. And so if you believe, as I do, that Oswald was some kind of intelligence agent, and if you believe, as I do, that he was intersecting with these Cuban exiles, unbeknownst to him, he was actually being set up by them, then that's the second part of the triangle. Then when Oswald survived, I believe that Oswald was supposed to have been at the Texas Theater. But there were too many people there. There were like 24 people there. And Oswald made too much of a distraction and screaming, "I'm not resisting arrest," etc. And so they couldn't do away with him there. And so this is when Jack Ruby was dragged in. The CIA goes to their former partners, the mafia, and they say, "Do you have anybody who can get rid of this Oswald guy for us in Dallas?" All right. And so somebody like Trafficante says, "Yeah, Louis McWillie can do it for us." He was a very close friend of Ruby, and Ruby once said that he would do anything for Louis McWillie. All right. He actually sent him guns when he was in Cuba. Okay. And so I believe that you have this three-sided triangle that cooperated in getting rid of Kennedy. I don't see how anybody can look at the Zapruder film and at that layout in Dealey Plaza. Have you ever been there?
I was just going to tell you, for my bachelor party, my best man and I went to Dealey Plaza. We flew to Dallas. We stayed there for a week. And we spent a big chunk of time at Dealey Plaza.
Anybody who's been to that place, and you've examined it, it's almost impossible to believe that they approved that route, okay, because you really could not get a more perfect setting for an ambush. And contrary to what some people say, that was not the only way to get to the trademark. The House Select Committee just looked at the street maps from the time and said, no, you could get there on Industrial Boulevard. You didn't have to take that route. All right. So why did they take such a perfect ambush site, as the way to get to the trademark? Because you have, look, in short order, you have tall buildings behind you. In short order, you have fences in front of you. Okay, both on the left and on the right. Since you have this double turn in the space of a block, you have to slow down the car to like 11 or 12 miles an hour.
Perfect pinch point.
All right. And so you also, since you have a parking lot behind the grassy knoll, and you have a parking lot behind this old book depository, and you have a parking lot behind the south knoll, you have exits, perfect exits. So how any Secret Service agent could approve that motorcade route, I mean, really, these guys should have been busted. They really should have. And on top of that, I'm sure they're partying till 3 o'clock in the morning at that after-hours bar called The Cellar, and they're drinking hard liquor.
Wasn't George Carlin performing or something? There's like a famous. I think there was a famous.
Satire.
I think there was a famous comedian who was performing at America's Untold Stories. Probably heard that, but yeah, that's.
And when they have a 7 o'clock call.
Yeah.
How can you get bombed and be okay in 4 hours? And here's the capper to that story. They paid the fire department to guard Kennedy that night because they knew they were going to be out late. So what are we supposed to do? There's like some guys with axes and helmets that are
ready to hack anyone that gets close.
I mean, really, it's so bizarre. I mean, you would think this is science fiction, but it's not. Everything I'm telling you is true.
Well, and it's again, like, even day of, when the guards on the car get told to, like, stand down, there's so much.
That's right at left field.
Yeah. There's so much stuff that is occurring at a level of organization and would have to come through, like, some kind of legitimate channel to tell. Like, Oswald has no say over the Secret Service. You know, like, there's no scenario where he was telling those guys to not be on the motorcade. That had to come from somewhere higher. And then you look at JFK's relationship, or tense relationship with Dulles, and even LBJ. There's just like a lot of people.
But wait a minute, I think it's more than tense with Dulles. I
mean, sure. I was being gentle with it, but yeah, I mean, and if you want to kind of go into that a little bit. That to me, when
Alan Dulles had been the head of the CIA for something like 7 or 8 years, and it had been the job he had always angled for. It was his dream position to run the CIA. So then he comes in as deputy director, and then he replaces Walter Bedell Smith as CIA director. And Dulles revolutionizes the CIA. He turns it from an intelligence gathering operation into a covert action organization. All right, and this is when the overthrows throughout the world begin. Okay, and it's because Dulles had been a part of this big legal company in New York called Sullivan and Cromwell, who had a lot of clients in the third world. All right, and these clients, of course, would profit from the colonial situation or imperial situation in those places. All right? And so, in short order, you have the overthrow of Mossadegh, you have the overthrow of Arbenz, then you have the attempted overthrow of Sukarno. All right? And there were people inside the government who objected to this. All right, there's a very famous report called the Bruce Lovett Report, okay, by a guy named David Bruce and Robert Lovett. And they objected to what Dulles had done to the CIA. But they could never get him removed because his brother was a Secretary of State and had an entryway into Eisenhower's office. All right? Now, when Dulles blows the Bay of Pigs, all right, and Kennedy believes he lied to him about the operation, his brother is appointed to the review board that was going to investigate the problems with the Bay of Pigs. And Robert Kennedy came to the conclusion that Dulles knew it was going to fail in advance. And his hope was that JFK would send in the Marines and the Navy to bail out the failed operation, which he didn't do. All right, and so Bobby Kennedy talked to his father about this. All right, and his father told him, David Bruce and Robert Lovett wanted to get rid of Dulles a long time ago. All right, and they wrote up a report about it. And so Kennedy found the report. Bobby Kennedy found the report. All right, and he gives it to his brother. And Robert Kennedy brings in Robert Lovett into the Oval Office. And he says, yes, we wanted to get rid of this guy. We thought that what he was doing was utterly wrong. It was smearing the name of the United States in the third world. Okay? We couldn't get rid of him because of his brother. All right? His brother was right there as Secretary of State that Eisenhower idolized. But you now have the opportunity to go ahead and dispense with him, which is what we tried to do in the 50s. All right? And so once he was met with that, JFK decided to fire not just Allen Dulles, but also the deputy director, Charles Cabell, and the director of operations, Dick Bissell, because he figured those are the three guys most responsible for this debacle. Okay, and they had set him up with all this false information, all right, that somehow there was going to be an uprising in there was going to be an uprising in Cuba, and they would never be able to get their tanks and mortars to the front in time, and all this other stuff, which all turned out to be utterly and completely wrong.
Yeah.
All right, and so Kennedy, the only time I've ever read that Kennedy went through a period of depression was in the wake of the Bay of Pigs. That night he actually cried into his wife's arms. How could I have been so stupid as to let them go? And this is what motivated him to go out and try and clean up the CIA. All right, and he actually said, I'm sure you're aware of this quote, that he's going to crush the CIA into 1,000 pieces.
Yeah.
Now, so when you say that he had a kind of problematic relationship, I think it's actually worse than that.
Well, certainly. And it's, again, it's one of those things where, like, until I got older, being aware of this my whole, young adult life, and it wasn't until I got older and started reading into the history of that, where, the assassination starts to make sense. You've got the people who were using the CIA to overthrow governments for their own personal private gain, smearing the name of the U.S. They're organizing all these assassinations all over the world. Kennedy cuts them off, and then Kennedy gets assassinated?
Right. It's too much of a coincidence.
You know what
right?
I mean? It's like you're telling me the new free agents aren't still going to try and do their work out, not being
we forgot about Lumumba.
Lumumba and Dag Hammarskjöld. Yeah, for sure.
Patrice Lumumba was the elected leader of Congo. All right. And let me make two things clear. He was a democratically elected leader of a constitutional republic in Congo. All right. It's not like he was some tin horn dictator or anything. Okay. He was elected by the people, and they had a constitutional government. Well, Eisenhower didn't like this. All right. And so he actually ordered Dulles to get rid of Lumumba. All right. And there was something like, I don't have my material in front of me, but it's 4 or 5 different attempts to kill Lumumba, in the Congo. This included sending agents, codenamed QJ Win and WI Rogue, to Leopoldville to assassinate Lumumba. And then when that didn't work, they sent in the Technical Services Division, Sidney Gottlieb, to prepare poisons to put in his toothpaste, okay, to get rid of him that way. All right? And then finally the CIA decided, this is getting too obvious. All right? Let's just side with Lumumba's opposition and let's just ship him over there. Okay? So they captured him, and then the CIA went ahead and made sure, through blocking certain streams and having tracking on Lumumba's escape, that his enemies in Katanga would be able to track him down. And then they did. They shipped him to Katanga, which was the rebel state that Kennedy and Lumumba did not want to secede from Congo because it was so rich. And what they did to this guy is almost beyond imagining. They put him before a firing squad, okay, and they killed him. But when they found that certain people were trying to find out where his grave was located, they dug him up and they burned his body in sulfuric acid. And by the way, they did that twice to make sure there would be no remnants left of his body so he could not become a martyr, which, by the way, is what happened anyway.
Right.
He became a martyr in Africa anyway. And see, when you think about this assassination, what is so bad about this is that, and Jonathan Whitney wrote about this for about 50 pages in his book, Endless Enemies. Lumumba could have been an example, for sub-Saharan Africa, of a democratic leader who was really trying to help his people, which is why Kennedy liked him.
Yeah.
And why he teamed with Dag Hammarskjöld to try and keep him in control of Congo, despite the European imperialism there that led Katanga, the very rich mineral state, that had broken away, which was a fake state. It wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the Dutch and the British.
Right.
All right. And so they essentially did everything they could to keep Katanga a part of the Congo. But then not only was Lumumba, but then Dag Hammarskjöld was in September of 1961. And when I say, I mean, that was no accident, okay, with his plane. There's a lot of literature out there now. If you haven't seen it, okay, you can look it up. Susan Williams wrote a book about this, Who Hammarskjöld, which is an interesting look at this plot to kill Dag Hammarskjöld. And I believe, and I guess we can close on this because it's pretty important. I believe that Kennedy knew Dag Hammarskjöld was, because his ambassador on the ground, Edmund Gullion, telegrammed him and said, whatever you think, this was not an accident. All right. And this is what inspired him to take control of policy in Congo. He went to the United Nations twice to get them to stay there until his Lumumba's follower, Cyril Odilla, was installed as a democratic leader who was trying to keep Congo together. Now, what happened? Well, it's what happened in Vietnam. Okay, once Kennedy is, that whole policy is reversed. Okay, and instead, Johnson sends in, and I wish I was making this up, but I'm not. He sends in the Cuban exiles with planes to track down the last of Lumumba's followers and get rid of them because he believed they were under the influence of the I'm not kidding about this, of the Chinese communists. Okay? All right? So this is what happens in place after place after, and this is what many people believe is the biggest proof of a high-level plot. Because all of these changes in Indonesia, in the Middle East, in Congo, in Cuba, in Vietnam, can these all be just a coincidence?
Right. Well,
So
especially
anyway,
when we have...
those are some of the reasons I believe that one can deduce about the Kennedy assassination. This to me is like the portion of the story that makes the assassination make total sense. For people who are on the fence about could this have been a conspiracy, all you have to do is look to everything leading up to the event, and then the event itself and the aftermath of the event, it becomes clear that there's something strange going on here. Let's put it this way. They knew who Johnson was. Okay. And they knew what Johnson would do after.
Yep.
Okay. And so they were banking on him, and he came through for them.
Big money man from Texas. It's just same class, same school. Well, I know we're going to wrap it up here. I just want to thank you again for coming on the show. I want you to maybe give a shout out to the places you want people to check out your work. I'm going to have
Why don't you show
all
the
of your
book
links.
again?
Yeah, you got it. The book is JFK Assassination Chokeholds, and it goes into all the details of the actual assassination that don't make sense. The actual chokeholds. You get into the bullet, you get into the brain. There's just so many.
We didn't even get to talk about the brain.
That's what I'm saying.
The brain is one of the most incriminating things about this whole case. In fact, I believe it proves conspiracy right on the surface. So very quickly, number one, Kennedy's brain is supposed to weigh 1,500 grams. The average weight of a brain, according to a Dutch study of 8,000 of them, was 1,340 grams. How can Kennedy's brain weigh more than the average when, in fact, if you watch his Zapruder film,
it's all over the car.
He gets his brains blown out.
Yeah.
Okay? He then goes violently backward. His wife goes out the trunk of the car, and they asked her, "What were you doing out the trunk of the car?" And she said, "I was trying to retrieve part of my husband's brain." Okay? The cyclist on the left side got hit so hard that he thought he'd been hit with a projectile.
Wow.
Okay?
From like a piece of the skull.
And then once they got to the hospital, his partner says, "You got this tissue in your teeth." Okay, that's how hard he was hit with what was left of Kennedy's brain. You look in the back seat of the car. There's all blood and tissue in the back. You look at Jackie Kennedy's suit. Okay, and by the way, she wiped off the worst part, which was on her face. Okay, before the pictures began.
Yeah.
So how could Kennedy's brain weigh more than the average when it's all dissipated all over Dealey Plaza? All right. Now, one last point about this. If somebody is by the result of a gunshot wound to the head, the brain is supposed to be dissected. What does that mean? That means you put it in a solution, you make it solidify, and then you either cut it like a bread loaf, or the other way you do it is by a pie diagonal slicing. Now, why do you do that? Because you want to find the directionality and the number of projectiles that hit the victim. Now, again, I'm not making this up when I say this. This was not done. Shockingly, this was not done in the Kennedy case. And in fact, nobody knows what happened to Kennedy's brain.
Well, yeah, like doesn't it go missing completely at some point in the 70s?
It goes where?
Doesn't it go missing completely at some point in the 70s?
Yeah, in fact, what some people thought, what the review board believed, was it was at a medical center right outside of Washington. They had a couple of leads that said that they had seen something labeled John F. Kennedy's brain, but they never followed up on whether that was true or not. So in other words, it's never been found.
Yeah.
All right? Okay? Now, one last point. 14 witnesses at both Bethesda and Dallas said that they saw a brain that a significant portion missing from it. Okay, a significant, like 1/3 of the right side. Okay, a lot of the back was gone, etc. So, in other words, you have all this evidence on every tier that shows that this cannot be Kennedy's brain.
Nowhere close.
All right. See, this is, in any normal homicide case, this would be thoroughly explored, and you would use it to discredit the prosecution.
Yeah.
But see, the Kennedy case exists in a kind of black hole or a Bermuda Triangle, which norms of prosecution, norms of legal proceeding, norms of the adversary system, they don't exist.
Right.
All right.
Well, it's kind of like a fog of war. That's
Yes.
how I've always seen the event happening and the things that happen in the 48 hours after the event. It's chalked up to the fog of war. It was too crazy. We couldn't have kept track of it. No one knew who was in charge. It was chaos.
Well, there was a lot of war going on after Kennedy was, especially in Vietnam.
He was kind of standing in the way of that.
Right,
they
exactly.
really opened the gates after that. They haven't really stopped. Well, and that's a great way to tie it back to the beginning. That's why this is important. That's why we have been robbed of a potential utopia, and it's basically greed and power. People want to maintain their greed and power, and we have been robbed from a world where maybe countries weren't completely adversarial toward each other at all times. Maybe there was some cooperation. That was the promise of Camelot. And what do we have now? I don't know. But anyways, Mr. DiEugenio, thank you for joining us today on this conversation.
Let me give a couple of shout outs.
Yeah, no, please.
My website
this is all your
is
moment.
kennedysandking.com. Okay, and there's a lot of research articles and book reviews that you can find. There it is, yeah. kennedysandking.com. All right. And there's a show I appear on semi-regularly called Black Op Radio, like every second or third week. Okay? And if you want to take a look at that film, which you just had up there, there's Black Op Radio. And
beautiful.
If you want to take a look at that film that you just had up there, JFK Revisited, that's being streamed to this day on several platforms. When it first came out, there it is. When it first came out, it was the #1 bestseller on Amazon for 3 weeks, and it's been shown in 15 countries worldwide. Okay, so those are my shout outs.
I love it. Thank you so much.
One last thing.
No, go ahead.
There's a book that goes along with the movie. It's called JFK Revisited, and it has the 2 screenplays for both the short version and the long version. Plus, it has interviews that did not get into the film.
Brilliant.
Okay, and there it is. JFK Revisited, the book, and that, I believe that came out very well. So I'm really proud of that.
I will.
All right, thank you, Mr. Oliva.
Yeah, of course. I'll have all these links in the description. Be sure to check them out if this topic interests you. Thank you so much again. This has been super fun.
Okay, my pleasure. Have a good day.
All right, everyone. We'll catch you on the next one.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The End. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva. That's obnoxious. Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva. Literally no one cares. For more Totally Legitimate Business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business or add us on TikTok at TLBpod. When will this end? Thank you for listening. Now get back to work. Move it along, buddy.